The Chinese Grand Prix ended with Kimi Antonelli on the top step of the podium, Lewis Hamilton beside him in Ferrari red, and a 25-second gap between Mercedes and everyone else. The celebrations were genuine, the result was deserved. But somewhere underneath all of that, a much more uncomfortable story had been building since Australia, and by the time the checkered flag fell in Shanghai, it had become impossible to ignore. Mercedes customers could not match their supplier, McLaren did not even start. And the FIA had already confirmed it was reviewing the energy management regulations that sit at the heart of why the gap exists. What everyone suspected about Mercedes after the Chinese Grand Prix is now confirmed. The question is what happens next. The story did not start in Shanghai, it started in Melbourne, the moment George Russell crossed the line nearly a full second ahead of Oscar Piastri, his closest Mercedes-powered rival, and the McLaren garage realized they were running what was supposed to be the same engine. Williams team principal James Vowles described being caught off guard by the efficiency gap. McLaren's Andrea Stella went further. He revealed that his team had been asking Mercedes HPP, the powertrain division based in Brixworth, for crucial information about how to operate the 2026 power unit for weeks before the season started. The requests went unanswered. Stella was blunt about what that meant in practice. McLaren were going on track, looking at the data, and discovering in real time what their package was actually capable of, without the foundational knowledge that the works team had spent months developing. The regulations are clear on this point. Appendix 4.5 of the F1 Sporting Regulations, clarified by a 2018 FIA technical directive, states that power units supplied by one manufacturer must be identical in all respects and capable of being operated in precisely the same way. If a customer team cannot operate their engine in the same way because they have not been given the information to do so, the manufacturer is in breach of that directive. By the time the paddock arrived in Shanghai, multiple teams had filed technical queries with the FIA. Drivers were speaking in coded language about a supplier that was not sharing what it was supposed to share. And Lando Norris, whose car did not even make the starting grid, summed it up with a shrug. Certain things, he said, we are having to figure out for ourselves. The most striking accusation of the Chinese Grand Prix weekend did not come from a rival team principal. It came from Lewis Hamilton, the man who drove for Mercedes from 2013 to 2024, who won 6 of his 7 world championships with the Brackley team, and who now sits in a Ferrari. After sprint qualifying in Shanghai, Hamilton spoke openly to the assembled media about what he believed Mercedes were doing with their power unit. He used a specific phrase that anyone who followed Formula One between 2018 and 2020 will recognize immediately: party mode. Party mode was a high-power qualifying setting that Mercedes used during that period, a mode that allowed the power unit to deploy incremental revs above its normal operating range for a single lap, delivering maximum electrical output at precisely the moments when lap time was decided. The FIA banned it in 2020. Hamilton's suggestion, made openly and on the record, was that Mercedes had found a version of that concept within the 2026 regulations. A way to extract additional deployment performance in qualifying conditions that other teams, including his own, could not replicate, because they did not have the information about how to do it. This is not speculation from a rival engineer or a paddock rumor. This is a 7-time world champion who spent 12 years at Mercedes, telling the media that his former employer is using a qualifying trick that the FIA has previously banned in a different form. The weight of that accusation is significant, and the FIA was already listening. Nicholas Tumbazis, the FIA's head of single-seater technical matters, confirmed in Shanghai that the energy management regulations would be reviewed after the Chinese Grand Prix. This was not a surprise announcement. The FIA had already signaled after Melbourne that changes were possible. But the confirmation in Shanghai, at a weekend where the performance gap between Mercedes and the field reached 25 seconds, carried a different weight. The FIA is not investigating Mercedes for a specific technical breach. What Tumbazis confirmed is broader and in some ways more significant. The regulations themselves may be creating a structural advantage that no single team should hold in a sport designed around competitive balance. The compression ratio loophole, Mercedes' cylinder heads expanding from 16:1 when cold to approximately 18:1 at operating temperature, has already been closed with a mandatory hot measurement test from June 1st. The FIA voted unanimously on that change. But the energy deployment rules, the superclipping limits, the deployment caps, those remain under review. Teams submitted their positions in a meeting 10 days before Shanghai. The unanimous view was to wait until after China before making changes. That review is now happening. What Ferrari, Red Bull, Honda and Audi suspected about Mercedes since pre-season testing in Bahrain, that the advantage was structural, regulatory, and potentially exploitable in ways that went beyond simple engineering excellence, has now been confirmed by the governing body's own actions. The FIA does not open regulatory reviews because everything is working correctly. When neither McLaren car made the starting grid in Shanghai, the immediate explanation was electrical failure. Two separate power unit issues, the team confirmed, unrelated to each other. But the context around those failures tells a story that goes beyond mechanical bad luck. McLaren had already acknowledged that they did not fully understand how to operate their Mercedes power unit. Stella had spent weeks trying to extract information from HPP that should have been provided automatically under the sporting regulations. The gap in qualifying between the Mercedes Works team and McLaren, sharing the same hardware, had reached 9/10 of a second in Melbourne. 9/10, same engine, different knowledge. When power units are being pushed into territory that their operators do not fully understand, reliability problems become more likely. McLaren's double DNS was the most dramatic single-race consequence of a situation that had been building since before the season began. Haas driver Oliver Behrman offered the most direct contrast available. Ferrari, he said, had been incredibly open and incredibly helpful with their customer teams on deployment strategy and energy management. Ferrari was sharing everything. McLaren was figuring things out alone. The gap between those two approaches, between a manufacturer that treats its customers as partners and one that treats them as competitors, is now visible in the race results. And Piastri, who has completed 0 Grand Prix racing laps through the first 2 rounds of the season, is paying the most personal price for it. The FIA has multiple tools available to address what is happening at the front of the 2026 championship. The compression ratio rule change arrives June 1st, a mandatory hot temperature test that closes the loophole Mercedes exploited in their cylinder head design. That change alone is estimated to cost Mercedes somewhere between 13 and 30 brake horsepower, worth 3 to 4 tenths per lap. The energy deployment rules are under active review. Options on the table include raising the super clipping harvesting cap, reducing maximum deployment power to allow more sustained electrical output, or adjusting the balance between combustion and electrical contribution. Any of these changes reshuffles the competitive order. The performance catch-up mechanism built into the 2026 regulations for exactly this kind of situation will be assessed after Race 6 in Miami. If any power unit manufacturer demonstrates an output deficit of more than 2% against the reference figure, they qualify for additional development opportunities outside the cost cap. Honda and the Aston Martin team are the most likely candidates for that relief. There is also a more immediate pressure point. The FIA sporting regulations are clear about what Mercedes HPP must provide to customer teams. If the ongoing discussion between McLaren and Mercedes does not result in full compliance, the FIA has the authority to enforce that obligation, and the political pressure from multiple teams to do so is now substantial. The Chinese Grand Prix confirmed what everyone suspected. Mercedes found something in the 2026 regulations that the rest of the grid has not. They are using it to win races by 25 seconds. And the sports governing body has now publicly acknowledged it needs to act. Hamilton's first Ferrari podium was the image of the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. But the image and the story are not always the same thing. Behind the celebrations, the FIA confirmed it is reviewing the regulations that gave Mercedes their advantage. Customer teams confirmed they have not been given the information they are entitled to under the sporting regulations. And Hamilton himself, from inside the Ferrari garage, confirmed that Mercedes are using a qualifying performance mode that echoes something the FIA previously banned. The suspicion is no longer just paddock talk. It is confirmed by the governing body's own review process. The question now is whether the changes arrive quickly enough to turn this from a Mercedes season into a genuine championship fight. Japan is next, then Miami, where the first formal power unit performance review takes place. Subscribe to F1 Perspective, we will track every development.